This state had a navy and lost it to debt collectors. Its power grid nearly collapsed in under 5 minutes. Its most famous battle was a military disaster, and it once made it illegal to speak an entire language in public. Welcome to 71 Dumbest Things About Texas, where nothing is made up and everything is worse than you think, from laws that let you shoot someone for a stolen lawnmower, to a town named Uncertain because nobody could agree where it even was, to the last Civil War battle fought a full month after the war was already over. Real history, real laws, real absurdity. Hit that subscribe button because Texas is about to get exposed. 1. Texas once had its own country, its own flag, and its own navy, and that navy was absolutely embarrassing. The Republic of Texas scraped together a 4-ship fleet that spent more time dodging debt collectors than fighting enemies. The ships were eventually repossessed mid-conflict because the government simply ran out of money to pay its own sailors. A brand new nation, freshly independent, and its entire naval force got taken away like a defaulted car loan. Texas showed up to nationhood with big dreams and an empty wallet. 2. In February 2021, during Winter Storm Uri, Texas came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of a total electrical grid collapse. The entire ERCOT system was seconds from a catastrophic failure that engineers later said could have left 20 million Texans without power for months. Not days, months. Pipes would have frozen, hospitals would have gone dark, and there was no backup plan. The state that built its own separate power grid specifically to avoid outside help nearly lost everything because of a cold snap that the rest of the country handled just fine. 3. The entire state of Texas genuinely believes it can legally pack its bags and walk out of the United States whenever it feels like it. Bumper stickers, bar arguments, and angry uncles at Thanksgiving have kept this myth alive for generations. There is just one embarrassing problem. The Texas Supreme Court itself confirmed this secession right does not exist and never did. Texas cannot leave. It never could. The whole independent spirit thing is built on a legal fantasy that not even Texas's own judges will back up. 4. One family in Texas owns more land than the entire state of Rhode Island and treated that fact like a casual Tuesday. King Ranch stretches across 825,000 acres, has its own zip code, employs its own workforce, and even bred its own registered cattle breed from scratch. This is not a ranch. This is a small sovereign territory with cows. Rhode Island has beaches, universities, and a state government. King Ranch has one family, endless grass, and the audacity to make Rhode Island look like a backyard garden by comparison. 5. When Texas first knocked on America's door asking to join the Union, Congress looked at the situation and said absolutely not. The problem was simple and brutal. Admitting Texas meant automatically tipping the entire United States Senate's balance toward slave states, and Northern senators refused to let that happen. So Texas, a whole independent country with its own president and everything, got rejected like a college application. It took nearly a decade of political maneuvering, a presidential election, and a joint resolution just to finally get Texas through the front door. 6. Texas declared war on beans and tomatoes, and has been fighting that battle at official cook-offs for over 50 years. The state's official chili recipe contains 0 beans and 0 tomatoes, and if you show up to a Texas chili competition with either ingredient in your pot, people will look at you like you committed a federal crime. Neighboring states have pushed back. Arguments have escalated into what historians actually call the chili wars. Grown adults, representing entire states, have spent decades screaming at each other over a stew. 7. Texas has more Fortune 500 company headquarters than any other state in America, which sounds incredibly impressive until you look at what that wealth is actually doing for its residents. Texas ranks near the absolute bottom nationally in per capita mental health funding. The state is swimming in corporate money and simultaneously leaving millions of people without basic mental health support. More billion-dollar companies call Texas home than almost anywhere else on Earth, and the state still cannot find the budget to take care of the people living in the shadows of those headquarters. 8. In 1900, a hurricane hit Galveston, Texas, and killed up to 12,000 people in a single night, making it the deadliest natural disaster in American history. The truly unforgivable part is that Galveston had been warned. Engineers and city planners had proposed building a seawall before the storm. Local officials rejected the idea because they did not want to alarm tourists or spend the money. The seawall was eventually built after the catastrophe, protecting the city from future storms, which means thousands of people died to teach Texas a lesson it refused to learn in advance. 9. In Texas, a person can legally purchase a military-grade flamethrower, carry it down a public street, and face zero state laws prohibiting ownership of that flamethrower whatsoever. However, certain Texas cities require residents to obtain a permit before operating a leaf blower, a device that shoots streams of fire, completely legal and unregulated at the state level. A handheld machine that blows leaves off a driveway that requires paperwork. Texas has somehow created a legal environment where burning things is freer than cleaning things, and nobody in the legislature apparently noticed the contradiction. 10. The battle that won Texas. Its independence from Mexico lasted exactly 18 minutes from start to finish. Sam Houston's forces caught the Mexican army completely off guard during an afternoon nap at San Jacinto, and it was over before most soldiers even understood what was happening. The Mexican general Santa Anna, the man who had slaughtered Texans at the Alamo, was later found hiding in the tall grass wearing a private soldier's uniform, trying to blend in with regular enlisted men. The commander of the entire Mexican army was discovered crouching in a field in disguise. 11. Texas sits at the absolute core of Tornado Alley and gets hit by more tornadoes every single year than any other state in America. Thousands of twisters have torn through Texas towns, flattened homes, and killed residents across decades of documented destruction. Despite all of that, Texas has zero statewide requirements for tornado shelters in new residential construction. Developers can build entire neighborhoods in the most tornado-prone region on Earth and legally install no shelter whatsoever. Texas will name a tornado after you before it requires anyone to build somewhere safe to hide from one. 12. When the Civil War ended in 1865, enslaved people across America were legally free. Nobody told Texas. For 2.5 years after the war concluded, enslaved people in Texas continued living under bondage while the rest of the country had already moved forward. On June 19, 1865, Union soldiers finally arrived in Galveston and announced the news that was already 2.5 years old. That delayed announcement became the foundation of Juneteenth, now a federal holiday celebrated across the entire nation. Texas managed to be late to freedom by over 900 days. 13. The Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo pulls in more annual visitors than the total number of people who actually live in the city of Houston itself. This is not a local county fair with funnel cakes and a Ferris wheel. This is the single largest rodeo event on the entire planet by attendance, drawing millions of people every year to watch cowboys, concerts, and cattle competitions under one enormous roof. Houston is a city of over 2 million people, and somehow its rodeo is even bigger than that. Texas built an event that outgrew its own host city. 14. Texas generates more wind energy than any other state in America, producing more clean power than the next two states combined, which sounds like an environmental success story until you read the second half. That same state simultaneously runs the most aggressive and well-funded fossil fuel lobbying operation in state government anywhere in the country. Texas is literally powering itself with wind while its own politicians fight to protect oil and gas at every legislative turn. The state discovered it could do both and apparently decided having a contradiction that large was perfectly fine. 15. In the 1880s, Texas ranchers were quietly cutting each other's barbed wire fences in the middle of the night, destroying property, blocking cattle, and occasionally shooting at each other in what historians actually called the fence-cutting wars. The violence got so out of control that the Texas legislature made it a criminal offense to carry wire cutters in your pocket. Not to use them illegally, just to carry them. Walking around Texas with wire cutters in your jeans was enough to get arrested. The state essentially criminalized a common tool because ranchers could not stop sabotaging each other's fences. 16. In 1947, the city of Texas City was having a completely normal morning when a cargo ship loaded with ammonium nitrate caught fire in the harbor. One cigarette, dropped into the wrong hold, triggered an explosion so catastrophic it killed 581 people, shattered windows 40 miles away, and leveled an entire industrial district in seconds. Nearby ships caught fire from the blast and exploded as well, turning the harbor into a chain reaction of destruction. It remains one of the deadliest industrial accidents in American history. And it started because someone could not wait to finish their cigarette somewhere safer. 17. The Alamo is Texas's most sacred founding myth, the story of brave men who died fighting for freedom, which is technically true, and also a story about a catastrophic military failure. 189 men were ordered to retreat from a fort they could not hold against 1,800 Mexican soldiers. They refused the order. They stayed. They died to the last man in a battle that lasted 13 days and accomplished nothing strategically. Jim Bowie, Davy Crockett, and William Travis all died there because the defenders decided glory was worth more than survival, and their commanders disagreed. 18. Somewhere in East Texas there is a town called Uncertain, and the name is not a joke or a marketing gimmick. It is a historical accident that became permanent. When surveyors sat down to determine exactly where the town's boundaries were, they genuinely could not agree on the answer. Rather than resolve the dispute, someone wrote Uncertain on the map as a placeholder, and it simply stayed there forever. Today, Uncertain, Texas has a population of 94 people who live in a town named after the confusion of the men who were supposed to professionally know where things were. 19. When Texas voted to join the Confederacy in 1861, the man standing in the way was Sam Houston, the living legend who had personally won Texas its independence from Mexico and served as the Republic's president. Houston refused to swear loyalty to the Confederacy. He warned Texans they were making a catastrophic mistake and would lose the war. Nobody listened. State officials physically removed Houston from the governor's office he had been elected to hold. The hero of Texas independence was thrown out of his own government by the same state he had built from nothing 25 years earlier. 20. A pharmacist in Waco, Texas invented Dr. Pepper in 1885 and decided the best marketing strategy was making it sound like medicine. He named it specifically to give it a medical credibility that soft drinks did not have at the time, essentially tricking customers into thinking fizzy sugar water was a health product. Dr. Pepper predates Coca-Cola, outsold competitors across Texas for decades, and eventually became the official state soft drink by an actual legislative declaration. Texas lawmakers formally voted to recognize a pharmacist's marketing scheme from the 1800s as the defining beverage of an entire state. 21. Texas proudly brags about having no state income tax, like it is the greatest gift a government ever gave its people. The celebration usually stops before anyone mentions the property taxes. Texas homeowners pay some of the highest property taxes in the entire nation, ranking consistently in the top 5 states. People who move to Texas specifically to escape income tax often discover their property tax bill is larger than what they paid. In states that do have income tax, Texas did not eliminate the tax burden, it just renamed it and attached it to your house instead. 22. Texas law allows any resident to openly carry a rifle into most public businesses without a permit, a license, or any formal training whatsoever. A person can walk into a restaurant with a loaded AR-15 slung across their back, and that is completely legal under state law. However, that same state's penal code places strict numerical limits on how many certain adult personal items a person may legally own at one time in their own private home. Texas decided regulating what consenting adults keep in their bedroom was more urgent than regulating who brings military-style weapons into a Applebee's. 23. In 1875, a Texas Ranger captain named L.H. McNelly decided that international borders were more of a suggestion than a rule, and led 30 of his men across the Rio Grande into Mexico to raid a ranch he suspected of harboring cattle thieves. This was a private military invasion of a foreign sovereign nation. Mexico protested immediately. The United States government publicly disavowed the entire operation and told everyone McNelly had acted alone. McNelly ignored all of it, completed the raid, and returned to Texas. One man with 30 Rangers conducted an unauthorized war with Mexico and faced zero consequences. 24. Most Americans picture Texas as a landlocked desert of cowboys and tumbleweeds, which makes it genuinely surprising to learn that Texas has a coastline, and that sitting off that coastline is Padre Island, the longest barrier island on the entire planet at 70 miles. Not the longest in Texas. Not the longest in America, the longest on Earth. Texas is quietly holding a world record that almost nobody outside the state knows exists. The state with the most famous land reputation on the continent has been secretly winning a geography competition in the ocean this entire time. 25. When 59 delegates gathered in 1836 to sign the Texas Declaration of Independence and formally create a brand new nation, two of those founding delegates could not read a single word of the document they were signing. They could not write either. Two men sat at the table where a country was being born, picked up a pen, and signed the founding charter of Texas with nothing but an X. The Republic of Texas came into existence with two illiterate signatures on its most important legal document. The new nation literally did not know what it had agreed to. 26. The Texas legislature operates on a schedule designed by 19th century lawmakers who believed the single greatest threat to Texans was their own elected officials being allowed to meet too often. The legislature convenes for only 140 days every 2 years, a limitation deliberately built into the system to minimize how much damage politicians could do if left unsupervised. In a modern state of 30 million people with complex infrastructure, healthcare, education, and economic needs, the government is legally allowed to function for less than 5 months out of every 24. The founders of Texas feared lawmakers more than they feared problems. 27. On January 10, 1901, a drill at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont hit an oil deposit so pressurized that crude oil exploded 150 feet into the air and kept shooting upward for 9 consecutive days before anyone figured out how to stop it. The amount of oil wasted during those 9 days of uncontrolled gushing exceeded the total combined oil production of the entire United States up to that point in history. Texas accidentally spilled more oil in 1 week than the whole country had ever intentionally extracted, and somehow turned that disaster into the foundation of a global petroleum empire. 28. Texas has a law that allows a homeowner to use deadly force at night to recover stolen property, which sounds like a reasonable self-defense principle until you read what that actually covers. Under Texas state law, it is legally justifiable to shoot and kill a person who is stealing a lawnmower from your yard after dark. Not threatening you, not breaking into your home. Stealing your lawnmower, a piece of outdoor equipment worth a few $100s, can legally cost someone their life in Texas, and the shooter faces no criminal liability as long as the sun has gone down. 29. Houston had a traffic problem so severe that city planners convinced the state to build the Katy Freeway, a highway so wide it stretches across 26 lanes at its broadest point, making it the widest road on the entire planet. Engineers celebrated. Officials cut ribbons. Drivers merged onto the most expansive stretch of asphalt in human history and promptly sat completely still in traffic. Studies conducted after the opening confirmed that congestion in the corridor was measurably worse than before the highway was expanded. Texas spent an enormous amount of money building the world's biggest road and made commuting slower. 30. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were both born in Texas, lived in Texas, and built their criminal legend robbing their way across the American South during the Great Depression. In May 1934, law enforcement set up an ambush on a Louisiana road and fired 130 rounds into their car without issuing a single warning. No commands to surrender, no announcement of police presence, just immediate and total destruction. Even newspapers in 1934, not exactly known for sympathizing with bank robbers, published editorials questioning whether what happened on that road was an execution rather than a lawful arrest. 31. Spanish conquistadors were among the most hardened explorers in human history, men who had crossed oceans, survived jungles, and conquered empires, and the Llano Estacado Plateau in West Texas broke their minds completely. The plateau is so perfectly, unnervingly flat in every direction that the conquistadors reported losing all sense of direction and descending into genuine psychological distress trying to navigate it. Their solution was to hammer wooden stakes into the ground at intervals just to track where they had come from. Professional explorers of the 1500s needed a trail of sticks to survive a flat field in Texas. 32. When Texas rewrote its state constitution in 1876, the authors were not interested in creating a fair governing document. They were interested in systematically stripping Black Texans of political power, and they built that goal directly into the text through literacy tests, poll taxes, and structural barriers designed to make participation legally impossible for an entire population. That constitution was not replaced. It was not thrown out when the courts caught up with history. It was repeatedly patched and amended while the core document remained. And that same 1876 Constitution, stitched together with over 500 amendments, still governs Texas today. 33. In 2012, a school district in Allen, Texas opened a high school football stadium that cost $60 million to build, a facility more expensive than most Division I college athletic complexes in the country. This stadium was constructed exclusively to host football games played by teenagers on Friday nights. It seats 18,000 people, has a massive video scoreboard, and was funded by a community that decided no expense was too large for high school sports. The students who play there will graduate, move on, and the town will spend decades paying off the mortgage on a teenager's football field. 34. Texas exports more goods than any other state in America, surpassing California, New York, and Florida combined in total export value, which makes it one of the most economically dominant regions on the planet. The single largest trading partner receiving all of those Texas exports is Mexico, the same Mexico that Texas fought a war against to win its independence. The same Mexico whose border Texas has spent billions of dollars militarizing and restricting. Texas built its entire export economy on trade with the country. It once declared its enemy and apparently decided the irony was not worth discussing publicly. 35. For most of its modern history, Texas kept a clause sitting openly inside its state constitution that banned atheists from holding any public office whatsoever. A person could be born in Texas, educated in Texas, elected by Texas voters, and then legally barred from taking their seat because they did not believe in God. This was not a relic from the 1800s that everyone forgot about. It sat in the Constitution, fully visible, until 2009, when a court finally ruled it could not be enforced under the United States Constitution. Texas needed a federal court to tell it religious tests were unconstitutional. 36. The border wall built along sections of the Texas-Mexico boundary in the 2000s was supposed to represent American control over American territory. What it actually did in several locations was accidentally fence American ranchers out of their own private land. The construction placed portions of legally owned United States property on the wrong side of the barrier, effectively putting American citizens on the Mexican side of a wall their tax dollars helped fund. Ranchers found themselves needing to pass through a gate in a federal wall just to reach land that had belonged to their families for generations. 37. 6 weeks after the Alamo fell, Mexican forces captured 342 Texan soldiers who had already surrendered at Goliad, marched them into an open field, and executed every single one of them. The Goliad massacre killed twice as many Texans as the Alamo battle that everyone memorizes in school. Twice as many men murdered after they had already laid down their weapons and given themselves up as prisoners of war. Despite being a larger and arguably more horrifying atrocity, Goliad barely appears in American history education. Texas built a legend around the smaller battle and quietly forgot the bigger tragedy. 38. Every summer, a massive dead zone forms in the Gulf of Mexico just off the Texas coastline, an enormous oxygen-depleted stretch of water where nothing marine can survive. Agricultural runoff from Texas farms carries excess nitrogen into the Gulf, triggering algae blooms that consume all available oxygen and suffocate everything beneath the surface across thousands of square miles. Fish, shrimp, crabs, and every other creature in the zone either flees or dies. Texas is inadvertently manufacturing an underwater extinction event every single year in the same Gulf waters that its own coastal economy and fishing industry depend on for survival. 39. When Texas finally agreed to join the United States in 1845, the annexation treaty included an unusual clause allowing Texas to split itself into as many as 5 separate states at any point in the future if it chose to do so. This was not a temporary provision with an expiration date. It was written into the agreement permanently. That clause has never been removed, never been repealed, and remains legally embedded in the original 1845 treaty to this day. Texas has been quietly holding the legal option to multiply itself into 5 states for over 180 years and has never used it. 40. Every single school day in Texas, students are required to stand up and recite a pledge of allegiance specifically to the Texas state flag, separate from, and in addition to the national pledge they also recite. The Texas Pledge asks students to declare loyalty to the state before they declare loyalty to the country. Children across Texas begin each morning by pledging themselves to Texas first and America second, a daily ritual encoded into state law by a legislature that apparently felt one pledge of allegiance per morning was not making the point strongly enough about exactly where Texas believes it ranks in the order of things. 41. In the 1930s, Texas made a deliberate and calculated decision to build its own electrical grid completely disconnected from the rest of America's power networks. The motivation had nothing to do with engineering superiority or technical innovation. Texas disconnected specifically to avoid federal regulation, keeping its power system inside state borders so Washington could not touch it. That decision still legally stands today. ERCOT, the grid Texas built for independence, serves 30 million people with no meaningful connection to neighboring grids, meaning when something goes wrong inside Texas, there is nowhere outside Texas to ask for help. 42. In 1919, the state of Texas made it a criminal offense to speak the German language in any public space, a law driven by anti-German hysteria so intense it turned neighbor against neighbor across communities that had been German Texan for generations. Families who had built farms, churches, and schools in Texas while speaking German for over a century suddenly faced prosecution for their own native language. The fear ran so deep that German Texan families voluntarily gathered their own family Bibles, documents written in German passed down through generations, and burned them in their yards to avoid any possibility of arrest. 43. When the Houston Astrodome opened in 1965, they called it the 8th wonder of the world, a gleaming domed stadium that was supposed to represent the absolute peak of human innovation. Then they tried to grow grass inside it, and the grass died because sunlight could not penetrate the roof properly. So Texas invented an entirely synthetic playing surface called AstroTurf and installed it as a solution. The new turf solved the grass problem and immediately created a different one, because AstroTurf gave players such severe rug burns during games that athletes started wearing long sleeves in the middle of a Texas summer to protect their skin. 44. During Prohibition, certain counties along the South Texas border became so thoroughly and openly controlled by armed bootleggers that federal law enforcement agents made an official policy decision to not enter those areas without military backup. These were not rough neighborhoods or high-crime districts. These were entire counties inside the United States of America that the federal government acknowledged it could not safely enter without soldiers. Bootleggers had essentially carved out sovereign, lawless territory within American borders, and Washington's response was to quietly avoid those zones rather than confront the reality of what had happened to them. 45. Tucked into the far western corner of Texas sit the Guadalupe Mountains, home to Guadalupe Peak, the highest point in the entire state of Texas. Most Americans have never heard of it. Most Texans have never been there. The Guadalupe Mountains National Park is so remote and so thoroughly unknown that it draws fewer annual visitors than any other national park in the contiguous United States. Texas is hiding its own highest geographical point in a park that almost nobody visits, while simultaneously being one of the most visited states in the country for every other reason imaginable. 46. Most people assume the governor of Texas is the most powerful person in Texas government, which is exactly what Texas wants everyone to think. The reality is that the Texas governor holds less formal institutional power than almost any other governor in the United States. The real power in Texas state government belongs to the lieutenant governor, who controls the state senate, appoints committees, and shapes legislation with far more authority than the governor can exercise. This arrangement was not an accident. It was deliberately engineered during Reconstruction specifically to weaken the executive branch and prevent any single person from accumulating too much control. 47. In 1971, a Dallas restaurant owner named Mariano Martinez was watching customers wait forever for hand-mixed margaritas and decided there had to be a faster solution. He walked into a 7-Eleven, stared at a Slurpee machine, and immediately understood what he needed to do. He modified a soft-serve ice cream machine to freeze and dispense margaritas automatically, invented the frozen margarita machine in his restaurant, and changed American bar culture permanently. The original machine that started it all was eventually collected by the Smithsonian Institution in Washington as an artifact of American cultural history. A Slurpee machine accidentally created a national institution. 48. During the 1980s, the Texas savings and loan industry collapsed so spectacularly and so completely that the federal government was forced to step in and bail out failed Texas financial institutions at a cost so staggering it exceeded the entire inflation-adjusted price of the Marshall Plan, the program that rebuilt all of post-World War II Europe from rubble. Texas managed to create a financial disaster in peacetime that cost more money to fix than reconstructing an entire continent that had just been destroyed by the deadliest war in human history. The federal government paid more to save Texas banks than to rebuild Europe. 49. In 2004, Texas executed Cameron Todd Willingham for allegedly setting a fire that killed his 3 children, a case that rested almost entirely on forensic fire analysis, presented by state experts as settled science. After the execution, multiple independent forensic investigators reviewed the evidence and concluded that the fire science used to convict Willingham was fundamentally flawed, based on outdated methods that modern investigators had already discredited. Willingham was dead. The reviews changed nothing legally. Texas officials disputed the findings, declined to reopen the case, and the execution of a man whose conviction rested on junk science remains officially unresolved. 50. In 1970, NASA's mission control in Houston became immortal when astronaut Jack Swigert radioed down the words that became one of the most recognized phrases in American history during the Apollo 13 emergency. Houston answered that call, guided 3 astronauts home from a crippled spacecraft, and cemented its reputation as the city that could handle any crisis imaginable. Then, in February 2021, a winter storm hit Houston, and the city could not keep its hospitals powered, its water pipes intact, or its roads passable for its own residents. The city that saved astronauts in space could not save its own people from ice. 51. For 2 full decades during the mid-1800s, the Comanche Nation exercised more real, functional control over Texas territory than the Republic of Texas government ever managed to establish. While Texas politicians in Austin were drawing maps and passing laws, the Comanche were enforcing their own authority across roughly half of what Texas claimed to own. The Texas government had jurisdiction on paper and almost nowhere else. An indigenous nation with no formal state recognition was operating a more effective territorial administration over a larger portion of Texas than the actual government of Texas could manage from its own capital city. 52. The Rio Grande is Texas's entire southern border, a river so historically significant that it appears on maps, in legislation, and in political speeches as a symbol of American boundary and sovereignty. Today, in certain stretches of that same river, a person can wade across it without the water reaching their knees. Decades of agricultural overuse, upstream damming, and accelerating drought have shrunk the Rio Grande so dramatically that in some sections it barely qualifies as a stream. Texas's most symbolically important geographical feature, the defining line between nations, has dried up so severely that the Grand River is in places just a puddle. 53. In 2017, a federal court reviewed the congressional district maps that Texas had drawn and ruled that the state had deliberately designed those boundaries with discriminatory intent against minority voters. This was not an ambiguous finding or a close legal call. A federal court determined that Texas had intentionally drawn maps to dilute the political power of its own minority residents. Texas responded by keeping those same maps in use through multiple election cycles while the appeals process dragged on through the courts. The state continued conducting elections on maps a federal judge had already ruled were drawn with discriminatory purpose. 54. In 2007, the Texas legislature formally designated the cowboy boot as the official state footwear of Texas, enshrining in law a boot that was engineered from the ground up for one specific purpose: sitting on a horse and riding it effectively. The heel angle, the narrow toe, the tall shaft. Every design element of the cowboy boot exists to serve an equestrian function. Texas made this the official shoe of a state where over 95% of residents will never ride a horse as part of their professional or daily life. Texas declared its official shoe to be one almost nobody actually needs. 55. The Texas oil industry collapsed so catastrophically during the 1980s bust that it did not just destroy oil companies, it took the entire state banking system down with it. When investigators later tallied the wreckage, 9 of the 10 largest bank failures in United States history up to that point had all occurred inside Texas within a single decade, not spread across the country during a national crisis. 9 out of 10, concentrated in one state within 10 years. Texas managed to claim the majority of the worst bank failures in American history as an exclusive regional achievement during a single economic downturn. 56. Texas elects its judges through popular vote rather than appointing them through a professional selection process, which produces results that appointed systems almost never generate. In 2018, Harris County voters walked into polling booths and in a single election night removed all 59 Republican judges serving on the county bench simultaneously, replacing the entire judiciary of the most populous county in Texas in one vote. Every single judge across every courtroom flipped in one evening. An entire county's legal system changed hands overnight because Texas decided that judicial appointments should work exactly like any other popularity contest. 57. Texas has been planning a high-speed rail line connecting Dallas and Houston since the 1990s, two of the largest cities in America separated by about 240 miles of flat highway that takes roughly 3.5 hours to drive. Multiple companies have formed, raised money, hired lobbyists, filed plans, fought legal battles, and generated decades of news coverage around this project. After more than 30 years of planning, legal challenges, company formations, and billions spent on preparation and litigation, Texas has not built a single mile of high-speed rail track connecting those two cities, not 1 mile. 58. When Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox on April 9, 1865, and the Civil War officially ended, a corner of Texas did not receive the message in time to stop fighting. On May 13, 1865, more than a month after the surrender, Confederate and Union forces clashed at Palmito Ranch in South Texas in what became the final battle of the American Civil War. Soldiers fought, men were wounded, casualties were taken in a battle that had no strategic purpose because the war it belonged to was already over. The last battle of the Civil War was fought by men who did not know they had already lost. 59. Most Americans picture Texas as an endless expanse of desert, scrubland, and open range, which makes it genuinely disorienting to learn that East Texas contains 15 million acres of dense temperate forest called the Piney Woods. Tall pines, thick canopy, winding creek beds, and landscapes that look nothing like anything else in Texas stretch across a region so geographically distinct from the rest of the state that visitors consistently assume they have accidentally crossed into Louisiana. Texas is quietly hiding an entire forest ecosystem that contradicts everything the state's brand tells the world about what Texas is supposed to look like. 60. In 2021, the Texas House of Representatives was facing a voting restriction bill that Democrats believed would harm minority voters and that Republicans had the votes to pass. Democrats had no procedural tools left to stop it except one. They left. 37 Democratic lawmakers chartered private flights, flew to Washington, D.C., and physically removed themselves from Texas to deny the legislature the quorum it needed to conduct business. Texas law required a minimum number of members present to vote. No quorum meant no vote. The only move left to the minority party was to abandon the state entirely and hope Washington noticed. 61. The Texas State Fair in Dallas has spent decades turning the concept of deep-fried food into a competitive sport with official judges, trophy ceremonies, and annual headlines. The fair has awarded its top prize to deep-fried butter, deep-fried Coca-Cola, and deep-fried bubblegum, all of which debuted at the fair, won official awards in their first year of competition, and were consumed by thousands of paying customers who stood in line specifically to eat them. Texas created a formal awards program for the act of submerging increasingly questionable foods into boiling oil and calling the results culinary innovation worthy of a trophy. 62. Elon Musk made a very public and dramatic exit from California, feuding loudly with state officials over taxes and regulations before announcing he was relocating Tesla's headquarters to Austin, Texas, a city he described as a beacon of freedom and growth. He moved. Tesla moved. Then, within months of settling into his new home state, Musk began publicly complaining that Austin's traffic congestion had already become unbearable for a city of its size. The man who left one state over its problems with growth and regulation immediately started complaining about the identical problems in the state he chose as his refuge. 63. Texas has some of the most discussed and debated abortion legislation in the country, but the conversation rarely includes a direct comparison to other crimes on the same legal books. Under current Texas law, the criminal penalty assigned to performing an illegal abortion is more severe than the penalty for negligent vehicular homicide, which is the legal term for killing a person with a car through reckless or negligent driving. Causing the death of an actual living human being with a vehicle carries a lighter criminal sentence in Texas than the abortion offense. Texas calibrated its penalties and apparently decided the math was acceptable. 64. When Texas deregulated its retail electricity market, it created a system where power prices could float freely, based on supply and demand, with almost no ceiling on what customers could be charged during emergencies. During Winter Storm Uri in 2021, that system functioned exactly as designed. Some Texas residents opened their electricity bills for a single month and found charges of $16,752. Not a billing error, not a glitch. A completely legal outcome produced by a deregulated market operating under the rules Texas had deliberately written. The state built the system worked, and the customers paid. 65. In 1842, the Republic of Texas was already an independent nation, with its own government, its own army, and its own capital city in San Antonio, which it defended as the symbolic heart of the young republic. Mexican forces walked into San Antonio and captured it. Then they left. Then they came back and captured it again. The capital of the Republic of Texas was taken by Mexican soldiers twice in a single year. Texas had just fought a revolution specifically to stop Mexico from controlling its territory, and within 6 years of independence could not prevent Mexico from strolling into its own capital city whenever it wanted. 66. Texas is so geographically enormous that it cannot fit inside a single time zone without creating absurd commuting and scheduling problems for residents in its westernmost regions. El Paso, sitting at the far western edge of the state, operates on Mountain Time while every other Texan lives in Central Time. Two people standing inside the same state, both Texans by law and identity, experience a different hour simultaneously simply because the state is too physically wide for one time zone to cover without breaking something. Texas did not solve this problem. It accepted that its own residents live in different hours and moved on. 67. Texas has redrawn its congressional district maps so many times, with both parties manipulating boundaries so aggressively when in power, that federal courts have intervened in the process multiple times across multiple decades. The maps have been challenged, ruled discriminatory, partially redrawn, appealed, sent back, and challenged again in a cycle that has made Texas one of the most persistently and expensively litigated political maps in the entire country. Both parties have participated in the manipulation at different points in history. The result is a state whose political geography has been legally contested so often that the courtroom has become a standard part of the redistricting process. 68. The Texas legislature convenes for only 140 days every 2 years, which means when it does meet, the clock is running and every session counts. During one of those precious limited sessions, the legislature found time to formally vote on and officially designate the cast iron Dutch oven as the state cooking implement of Texas. A governing body that meets for less than 5 months out of every 24 months, responsible for the laws of a state with 30 million residents, used a portion of that irreplaceable legislative time to take an official position on cookware. Texas governing at full capacity. 69. After the Civil War, Texas was broke in the way that only a state that had just lost a catastrophic war and had its economy dismantled could be broke. The state needed a new Capitol building and had no money to pay for one. So the legislature looked at what Texas did have in abundance and traded it directly to the construction company building the Capitol. The payment was 3 million acres of public land, handed over as straight compensation with no cash involved whatsoever. Texas built its own seat of government by giving away an area of land larger than the entire state of Connecticut in exchange for a building. 70. For over a century, Texas kept a constitutional requirement that any person seeking elected office must publicly declare their belief in a supreme being before they could legally take their seat. A Texas voter could choose someone. That person could win the election and then be legally prohibited from serving because of their private religious beliefs. This was not an informal tradition or a cultural expectation. It was written into the state constitution and actively enforced for generations. Texas needed a federal court order to finally establish that it could not require its own elected officials to pass a religious test before governing. 71. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport solved its parking problem by building the largest parking structure on the entire planet, a facility spanning over 15,000 individual spaces across a complex so vast it required its own internal shuttle system just to move travelers from their cars to the terminal. The lot is so enormous that drivers regularly get lost inside it trying to find their own departure gate. Texas built a parking garage so large that the solution to using the parking garage is a separate transportation system dedicated entirely to surviving the parking garage. Everything is bigger in Texas, including the parking problems. And that is 71 dumbest, wildest, and most unhinged things about Texas. But here is the real question. Is Texas genuinely the dumbest state in America, or is every other state just jealous they are not this entertaining? Drop your answer in the comments right now. If you survived this whole video, you already know what to do. Hit like, subscribe to Dumbest Things, and stick around because we are just getting started.